Hello, everyone. I'm George Roska.
And I'm Mark Schneider.
And we want to welcome you to today's episode 54 of Say What, where we talk about the threats to our children in the public school system, including the radical change that Disney Corporation has gone through in the last few years. And that's how it's related to our kids.
It is indeed, George. In fact, it's been a radical transformation indeed, what some are calling the institutional capture by LGBTQ radicals at the expense of Disney's once great legacy and name.
And Mark, we've already known, and I think our audience has heard this phrase, the long march through the institutions. And
It's
this
happening.
is one of them.
This is just one example, but I think it's particularly noteworthy, George, because of Disney's legacy. I mean, it is a giant in entertainment, but mainly child entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
It has always appealed historically to the best in parental instincts and giving safe entertainment for children that parents could always rely on. That has changed dramatically in the last few years. And I think, George, we need to probably give some background into what caused us to talk about this today. Most of our listeners probably have heard about Florida's recent parental rights and education bill that was passed recently and signed by Governor Ron DeSantis. It's House Bill 1557. And that bill will go into effect July the 1st. And it has caused a firestorm of controversy across the country. But it's important to understand what the bill actually says and why the controversy exists. Here's what the bill says. First of all, it only applies to children in kindergarten through the third grade. So we're talking about very early ages. But secondly, it states that classroom instruction in SOGI, sexual orientation and gender identity, cannot occur. In fact, here's the operative language in the bill. Classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through third grade or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. And finally, number 3, the bill also requires districts to, quote, adopt procedures for notifying a student's parent if there is a change in the student's services or monitoring related to the student's mental, emotional, or physical health or well-being. Now, that sounds pretty reasonable, I think, to me or any parent that does not want their young children being exposed to SOGI indoctrination in the public schools. But LGBT advocates are arguing that this is an infringement of child rights.
I can just imagine the Planned Parenthood supporters screaming outside of the governor's mansion saying that, they need a day off because they can't even work as a result of the passage of this law.
They're so traumatized.
Yes.
In fact, critics, as you know, George, have tagged this the Don't Say Gay bill, even though neither the word gay or the term LGBT is ever mentioned in the bill. You won't find those words in the bill. And of course, Disney is one of Florida's biggest employers with its flagship park at Disney World in Orlando. And the company in the last few years has had a change of leadership. Its longtime CEO, Bob Iger, retired. And a new guy, Bob Chapek, stepped into the role as CEO in 2020. Well, after some initial hesitation under Chapek's leadership, Disney has now mounted a full-scale assault on this bill, on Florida's right to protect its children against SOGI indoctrination. And this comes after having made the decision to push the LGBTQ agenda as hard as it possibly can as a formal company policy. In fact, let me read a statement from the company itself on this particular legislation. Here, this is a quote. Florida's HB 1557, also known as the Don't Say Gay bill, should never have passed and should never have been signed into law. Our goal as a company is for this law to be repealed by the legislature or struck down in the courts, and we remain committed to supporting the national and state organizations working to achieve that. We are dedicated to standing up for the rights and safety of LGBTQ plus members of the Disney family as well as the LGBTQ plus community in Florida and across the country.
Well, I just want to point out for our listeners who just read that Walt Disney Company in that tweet, Mark just read off of a tweet, was non-inclusive because the LGBTQ plus designation is no longer valid today. It has to be 2AIA++. So just wanted to put that out there.
We should point that out to him, George, and file a formal complaint. Well, the company's leadership, it's not just, of course, the CEO. In fact, I think the CEO is probably pulled into this kicking and screaming, but he's fully on board now. But there's a whole raft of corporate executives now that are pushing this agenda throughout the company. And a company-wide Zoom call by General Entertainment President Carrie Burke. In fact, she's a self-confessed mother of 2 queer children herself. She vowed that Disney would do more to become more inclusive. The meeting was part of a wider corporate program known as Reimagine Tomorrow. And one of its goals is to have a minimum of 50% of characters to be LGBTQIA and racial minorities. 50.
Wow. Say what?
Yeah. And as we know, in recent weeks, the company has reinstated a same-sex kiss in the upcoming Lightyear film, which is a Toy Story spinoff, which some of our listeners may have heard about.
So even though in the general population, that's in the single digits in terms of percentage for somebody to be non-heterosexual or gender binary, I think where they're coming from is that Gen Z, the kids they're targeting.
That's exactly right.
Is that that segment of the population is a lot more confused.
Yeah, I mean, past studies have shown that between 2 and 3% of people have leaned toward homosexuality or LGBT inclusion. The Human Rights Campaign puts the figure at 8%. I think that's somewhat self-serving. But in another one of these same meetings in Reimagine Tomorrow, executive producer LaToya Revenue boasts about the Disney not at all secret gay agenda. In fact, we have an audio clip of this.
It's like, I love Disney's content. I grew up watching, all of the classics. They have been a huge, informative part of my life. But at the same time, I worked at small studios most of my career, and I'd heard, you hear whispers. I'd heard things like, they won't let you show this at a Disney show. And I'm like, okay. So I was a little sus when I started. But then my experience was bafflingly the opposite of what I had heard on my little pocket of Proud Family Disney TVA. The showrunners were super welcoming, Meredith Roberts, and our leadership over there has been so welcoming to my not at all secret gay agenda. And so I feel I felt it was, maybe it was that way in the past, but I guess something must have happened in the last they're turning it around, they're going hard. And then all that momentum that I felt, that sense of I don't have to be afraid to let's have these 2 characters kiss. Let's in the background. I was just wherever I could, just basically adding queerness to if you see anything queer in the show, I'm proud.
Say
but,
what?
It was no one would stop me, and no one was trying to stop me.
Yeah, there you go. In another video, Disney's diversity and inclusion manager, Vivian Ware, explains to employees that the company is ditching the words ladies, gentlemen, boys, and girls in all its theme parks in order to not alienate transgender kids. Now Disney's attendees will be greeted as, quote, dreamers of all ages.
Interesting.
Really, you can't make this stuff up, George. It blows my mind. In fact, Disney production coordinator Alan March boasts that his team is committed to, quote, exploring queer stories and has created a, quote, tracker to make sure that they're creating enough gender nonconforming characters, canonical trans characters, and canonical bisexual characters. Yeah, it just goes on.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up with this craziness anymore. The terminologies that's being used, it's just even for us who are constantly researching this topic.
We're still shocked.
We're still shocked.
As for Disney CEO, after his initial hesitation, Chapek issued a mea culpa of sorts to his employees. In a memo to his employees, he wrote, "Speaking to you, reading your messages, and meeting with you have helped me better understand how painful our silence was," he wrote. "It is clear that this is not just an issue about a bill in Florida, but instead yet another challenge to basic human rights." He continues, "You needed me to be a stronger ally in the fight for equal rights, and I let you down. I am sorry."
Oh, poor him.
And then he committed to donating $5 million to the Human Rights Campaign, a very radical organization. I think that money could have been better spent maybe to a donation to protect our kids. Regardless, chairman of, it goes on, George, chairman of Disney General Entertainment of Content, Peter Rice, told The Hollywood Reporter after a recent shareholder meeting that, quote, "The Florida law is a new and painful iteration of a history of discrimination against an already vulnerable group. Personally, I see this law as a violation of fundamental human rights, and I condemn any attempt to marginalize individuals on the basis of their identity." He continues, "I appreciate that Bob recognized that we must do more to support the LGBTQ plus community." He left out the IA, so not really inclusive here. Bottom line is that the totality of Disney leadership is foursquare behind radicalizing the company, and they are well underway of doing that. In fact, every new cast member in Disney's history, their long, great history, has had 4 keys drilled into them from day one. These keys are safety, courtesy, show, and efficiency. It's been this way for 60 years. In fact, some of our listeners who have worked for the Disney Corporation, I'm sure they'll be very familiar with these terms. But George, on April of 2021, a 5th key was added. Can you guess what it is?
Something to deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion.
You would be right. Inclusion now is the 5th key after 60 years. In the 2 years between 2019 and 2021, the DEI department, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, within the Disney company expanded 633%, according to an article in Quillette, at the same time that nearly every other department in Disney was contracting between 25 and 75%.
Wow.
In fact, the article, it's called Disney's Institutional Capture, written by Ethan Clay on March 29th, 2022 in Quillette. And he writes, "But as usual, inclusion only protects those who think like DEI activists. Fairness only applies to historically oppressed people groups. The only pain worth understanding is that felt by the subsection of LGBT cast members who believe that sex education ought to begin in kindergarten." He goes on to write, "The sexual revolution, the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War, the assassinations of JFK, RFK, MLK, and Malcolm X, the Cold War, stagflation, the Stonewall riots, Watergate, Roe v. Wade, the space race, the Los Angeles riots, September 11th, Hurricane Katrina, every major event that took place in American society since Disneyland first opened its stores in 1955 rolled by, and the 4 keys remain unaltered. And yet, in 2021, as the nation reopened from lockdowns and fits and starts, the 5th key of inclusion was added. Why now? Why at all? The short answer is what he calls institutional capture. The goal is to turn the business itself into a mouthpiece for an ideology. Disney has been rotting from the inside for quite some time, but the speed with which its public transformation took place is truly breathtaking. Florida was the final straw.
What's interesting to me, Mark, is that not only a company like Disney, but so many other companies and people and individuals through COVID have really come out with their true colors.
Yeah, it's been a very polarizing issue. And
Yeah.
it's forced people to state their position, whatever it happens to be. But here's the question, George. Obviously, they've taken this position. That's their right as a company. If they want to become a public advocacy firm for LGBTQ rights, that's their right. I don't think it's wise for the shareholders, but they can make that decision. But are they being consistent in their public policy promotion? Their ideology umbrage seems to be conveniently selective. And Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis pointed this out. He pointed out that Disney's cruise line advertises its cruises to the Dominican Republic, a country that happens to ban same-sex marriage and condones discrimination against gay people.
So you're telling me that the CEO of Disney is not willing to go down to the Dominican Republic and condemn the country and its leaders and publicly and put $5 million against their races or whatever they do down there?
I have not heard anything to that extent. In fact, I'm looking at a screenshot of a web capture that I got last night, and you can see at the Disney Cruise Line. You can sign up for it to go to the beautiful Puerto Plata in the Dominican Republic. But it gets worse, George. China. Of course, Disney has a very strong presence in the People's Republic of China. But Disney seems to have no hesitation in operating there. They've got 2 parks, one in Shanghai and one in Hong Kong, where it's been well publicized that the abuse of the Uyghur community has been going on for decades now. But Disney, strangely, has not seemed to utter a word about that. In fact, the company routinely seems to bow to the Chinese Communist Party, notably removing a joke about Tiananmen Square from an episode of The Simpsons and a kissing scene from its $200 million big-budget live-action adaptation of Mulan after Chinese executives said it was inappropriate. In fact, 2 years ago, Disney thanked government entities in Xinjiang province, where the Uyghurs live, in the credits for its live-action adaptation of Mulan, which was partially filmed in that province. And as far as I know, George, Soji indoctrination is not taught in any of China's public schools. Where is Disney's outcry about that?
Yeah, the hypocrisy is astounding. But Disney has, I think, much bigger problems as well here in the United States.
And you found this. I wasn't aware of this, but apparently its employees have been involved in a lot of headlines. You don't see this on MSNBC or CNN or the mainstream, but nevertheless, they do exist. Maybe you can talk about some of those, what you found.
Yeah, this was shocking for me because I think over the last 2 to 3 years, I've started to see this more and more. But just a compilation of about 6-7 headlines here. 4 Walt Disney World employees arrested in undercover human trafficking sting. This was March 16th, 2022. Recently. This is just last month. 3 employees of Walt Disney World arrested in major child sex sting in Florida. This is August 5th, 2021. Again, less than a year ago. Disney security guard shows up buck naked to human trafficking sting. 124 arrested, sheriff says.
124.
Wow. Like, Florida child sex sting nets former workers from Disney, SeaWorld, and Universal Studios. This is June 2019. I mean, these are all very, very recent, and I can go on with the other ones.
And these are all in Florida?
Most of them are in Florida.
Do you think Florida has a reason to be concerned about what is being taught to their children in the elementary schools?
Most definitely.
Well, I guess this begs the question, George, what can parents do? What can the public do about this? Obviously, one thing they can do is stop subsidizing the Disney empire.
Yes.
By signing up for its services, by visiting its parks, by not going to see its movies. We heard one report, according to Ohio Value Voters, that Disney has had more than 350,000 cancellations in just the past 5 days alone.
Of its Disney Plus membership or subscription.
There's nothing that gets an attention to shareholders than all of a sudden a rapid decline in revenue. So this would definitely make a difference. I think the public should vote with their dollars whether they want to support this kind of public advocacy.
You know, just like people have been voting with their feet and moving to freer states, and that's what we need to start doing with our money, because this corporatism in America is really taking over. It's just activist corporations, like you said, Mark, that are straying away from their mission, and they're truly becoming political action committees.
They really are, George. And there's one more thing I guess that parents can do, and you found this, that apparently there's a petition going around.
Yes.
Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, so if you go to parentsfightback.com, an organization called Hold the Line put this petition out, and there's 4 things that this petition asks for besides your signature. One is to pray for Disney to have a change of heart.
Amen.
So as believers, we always resort to prayer first, not last. Second is remember your God-given role as a parent to instruct your children in the ways of the Lord. No matter what goes on out there in the world, in your house, you need to be giving this proper instruction. Number 3 is refuse to accept the idea that corporations have the right to push woke politics on our children. So parents, stand up against this. And then number 4, stand firm as an American citizen and speak the truth boldly wherever you are at. In your workplace, with your neighbors, whatever it is, stop shying away from speaking the truth.
And number 5, sign the petition at parentsfightback.com. So there are definitely some things that parents can do, and this is not a time to sit back and just say, oh my, this is terrible what they're doing. You need to take action. Otherwise, nothing's going to change. This is just going to go on. Well, George, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. I hope this has been enlightening and that this will spur you to take action indeed. Until the next time.
Well, parents, you can also educate yourself more by going to protectourkidsnow.org.
Of course.
Please sign up to our weekly blogs. You can also invite Mark and I to come and speak to your church or group. And we kindly invite you to prayerfully consider donating to our cause. Until next time.
Take care.